Okay, so these are just a few of the many blocks that I made to for this backyard birds pattern. I designed it to be a mix and match pattern so that you could create basically any songbird that you want to make. But I also wanted to give you specific instructions for 100 different birds. And so the pattern has specific instructions for about 100, for 100 different birds, actually 101, because I added another one for the video step-by-steps. But the idea was that you would be able to make your own birds as well. So maybe I didn't do a Kentucky warbler, for example, and maybe that's one of your favorite birds and you want to do a Kentucky warbler. So what I'm going to talk about in this video is how to look at a photograph of a bird and decide which templates you want to use. So I've got some paper templates printed out, and I'm just going to show you a bunch of different ways that you can combine them and recombine them and play with them and create your own birds that I did not do. One thing to point out is that I almost always did the male version of the bird, and you may want to do some female versions. So maybe that's a way that you want to use it. Like you'll want to do a pair of Baltimore Orioles, and I only gave you pattern instructions for the male Oriole. So there's a lot of different ways that you could use these, and this is just a tiny stack. If I put the whole stack of blocks that I've made, they actually touch the camera where I have it on the tripod. So I just wanted to kind of show you a little overview of all of the different birds. But now I'm going to talk you through some specific templates. And for this, instead of fabric, I printed out some paper templates and I colored them because I wanted you to be able to see how they overlap each other, and that just doesn't show as well on video with white, just black and white printing. So I am going to just pull these apart a little bit. So I've got a few different categories of templates that I'm going to show you. So here's a whole bunch of itty bitty pieces. There are a lot of templates, and I recommend that you print them out if you're going to be doing any of your own designing. I recommend that you print them out just on black and white paper. You don't have to color them like I did, but use those to try out different combinations in paper instead of in fabric. Otherwise, you'll end up like I did with a whole bunch of extra parts that ended up not working. And I was able to reuse some of them, but it does get a little wasteful if you do that a lot. So when I am laying out a bird, so let's start first with the body, because the basic body shape is the first thing that the first decision that you're gonna make. Is it a crested head or is it a round-headed body? The round-headed comes up more often, so I'm gonna show you an example here with a round-headed body, but I've got both of those possibilities. Now, this is a fairly chunky bird, and that decision was made really early on because I wanted the legs to be able to applique them and not have to just stitch lines, because that is tedious and not very fun. But chunking up the legs enough to applique them means that I also wanted to chunk up the rest of the body. It gives it a little bit of a cartoony look. It also simplifies it a little bit. So we're not doing perfectly realistic birds. We're doing a little stylized version of the birds. But even with just one simple body shape, one basic body shape, there are things that you can do with how you position it on the page or on your block that are going to change the overall look of it. For example, some birds tend to sit very upright. And so when I'm looking at photographs of birds, I want to look at where that back is. Is that back fairly up and down? Is that back... This is what I think of as kind of a standard bird position, just like a little bit of a sloped angle. Some birds almost always tip forward. And let me throw a beak in there so that you can see. Well, here we'll do a long beak. So I've got some markings here. They are really only applicable for the standard upright body. So you're not going to transfer those markings, but they just give you a little guideline when you're getting started. But some birds maybe are bent all the way down. That, like a nuthatch, they like to sit with their butt up in the air. But some birds, like a yellow warbler, like to be, their back is almost straight parallel to the ground, and then their beak is coming out the front of this pointy piece, and that gives a very, very different silhouette from your basic bird, which might look like this, which is also going to be different from a very upright bird, which might look like that. So the first thing that you're going to be looking at is the angle of the bird's back, and think about how, and then kind of transfer that to the page, so or to your block, because the first piece that you're going to lay down is going to be the body. The next piece I lay down is always the tail. So let me find a tail here. So I've got a tail piece, and this block is 10 inches square. So this piece of paper that I cut here is the finished size of my block. And I just wanted to show you a couple of warning things. If you have a bird that has a very upright, a very long body, and he has a longish tail, you're not going to be able to fit the beak on there if it's a long beak also. So you may need to shorten the tail a little bit more than it would be, or shorten the beak a little bit more than it would be. But I've designed this to really fill a 10-inch square block for almost all birds. And that means that some birds with a very, very long pose are going to be a little difficult to fit into the block. So if you have a bird with a long tail and a long beak and a kind of a long stretched out pose, you're going to want to measure your block, because you make your blocks a little bit bigger and then you're going to trim them down to size. So just measure that before it goes into place. But normally they can fit just fine. So I've got a little dotted line on the tail. The dotted line is where I cut it for your basic tail. And then I cut it a little bit longer for a long tail, but there are also birds with very, very short tails, and you're just going to slide that piece up under the body however you need to get your bird. But most birds have just like a normal length tail. So that's the first piece that I put in there. And again, I'm doing that so that I can gauge the width. And then I choose from my beaks, and I've got a long beak. I've got a really long beak. I tried to do names that were just very clear. I've got a fat beak, and I should have somewhere in here just a basic beak, just a little pointy kind of standard beak. And I can't find it because it's so little. That's okay. We'll use the long beak here. So get your tail and your beak in place. Get your the posture of the body, and make sure that that's going to fit in your block if you're working with long pieces. So the next thing I put in place are the feet. And the feet have two things here. There's a shorter foot and a longer foot. So both of these, if you put them just barely under the body, is going to give you a fairly long-legged bird. For shorter birds, for shorter-legged birds, like a normal kind of bird pose, right, like an average height bird, you're going to tuck those pieces a little bit further up on the body, under the body. For really short-legged birds, like hummingbirds, where most of the time you can barely even see their feet, you're going to go really short, and you're just going to push that piece all the way up there until you get a really short foot. Now, every once in a while, I'll switch and I'll put the long leg in the back and the short tail in the front. And I especially did that with a nuthatch, because a nuthatch tends to be pointed down. His tail is perked up. And so you still want the legs to be coming out of the back part of the body. But that's how you can get the nuthatch, which is called an upside down bird. So again, and then you can slide the legs in. Don't stress too much about whether it's a long-legged bird or a short-legged bird. You can read the the descriptions of it. I really like a website called All About Birds. It has, in addition to really good photos, it has also really great descriptions, and it'll tell you that it's a long-legged bird with a long beak and a long tail, or a short tail and really long wings if it's like a certain kind of starling, or I mean a swallow. It'll tell you if that bird usually has its tail perked up instead of pointed down. So reading the descriptions too can be really helpful. Looking at more than one photo of the bird can give you a better idea of what their normal posture is. But if you find a posture that's not typical posture, but you think it's super cute, like I like it when the nuthatch is really, really got his butt up in the air. I just think that that's a very cute pose. So that's what I did for mine. But they also will sometimes stand just like a regular bird. So you have options. And that is the fun of a mix and match pattern, is you really can't go wrong. It's still going to look like a bird. So I'm going to give this guy a perked up tail now. Okay, so once you get the head, the tail, the beak, and the feet, every bird has got a head, a tail, beak, and a feet. And every bird has a wing, and almost always that uses the basic wing pattern. Every once in a while, there's a bird with a very short wing, like a hummingbird has really short wings. So I used the shoulder piece instead of the wing piece because that just gave me a short wing. They also, a hummingbird also has a really short tail. So I just tucked that tail up and then gave it a very short wing and really short feet. And then the long hummingbird beak. Oh, I didn't show you. I do have one other beak. I have a hummingbird beak. Every once in a while too, I needed to make extra long wings. And when I did that, instead of making the shoulder just overlap the wing, I just stretched it out a little bit and it overlapped less of the wing to stretch it out a little bit. So you've got some room that you can play with here. But your basic bird, and these are the birds that are marked as easy in the spreadsheet. So that list, that table of all of the birds lists A birds, B birds, and C birds. A birds are the easiest, so I recommend you start with some of those, and they are just going to be a body, a tail, feet, a beak, and a wing, and an eye. They all have an eye. And that is it. So that's what you're going to start with. Now let's talk about some of the additional pieces that you might put on there. So I've got a whole bunch of different belly pieces. And what you want to look for in your photo of a bird is if the belly is a contrasting color, does that contrast go all the way to the tail? Does it just go to the legs? Does it go all the way up to the beak, or does it start somewhere down here? So this is a piece that I call neck to almost tail, and it starts down below the beak and it doesn't go all the way to the tail. So that's one possibility for a belly. I've also got neck to tail, which starts in roughly the same place, just below the beak, but this one goes all the way to the tail. This is a really, really common piece. And on this one, also, I should point out that the line between the belly piece and the back is mostly covered up with your wing when you put your wing on there. So you're only going to see that line a little bit at the front of the bird. I also have beak to tail, fat, which is a beak to tail piece. It goes all the way from the beak to the tail and it puffs up. It goes up into their face a little bit and way up under the wing. I've also got beak to tail that is not fat. Goes just all the way from the beak to the tail, but this one swoops down instead of curving up into the face. Then this one's also a fun one. This is neck to rump. So this is there we go. You just kind of slide it around until the curves match. And this goes from the neck down to the rump of the bird, but not all the way to the tail. And then I also have this belly piece, which is a tall piece. It goes from the neck to almost the tail. I don't use this one very often. So let me put in this neck to tail. That's a common one. So I'm going to put that one in there, and then I'm going to show you one more piece. So there's also an underbelly piece that goes all the way from the tail to the beak. Sometimes it's just this piece, but very often this piece will be combined with a neck to tail piece. So the back of the bird is one color, and then the top part of his belly is another color, and then it goes often to a white in the very, very underbelly. But sometimes you also have a bird that's all one color and just has this sliver of color showing in its underbelly. So that's a whole bunch of the belly shapes that you might be dealing with. So now let's talk about hoods. So there's all kinds of different heads. So there's a hood, and there's also, sometimes I call it a top hood if it's just the top part of the hood piece, depending on how far down on the head that comes. And then there is head, throat, and back piece. Now you can cut this apart and you can use just the back piece, or you can use just the head and throat piece, but they also often work as a set. So you'll see both of that. So this is one where it doesn't go as far down the neck, the back of the neck, as the hood piece, and it goes down farther on the chest. So that's that head and throat piece. There's also a small hood, which is really just on the front of the bird's head, a much, much smaller hood. And there is a forehead, getting into progressively smaller pieces here. So the forehead just sits on the forehead. And there's also a crown piece that sits more on the top of the head and comes down. And sometimes those will actually sit up a little bit. You can push that up if it's a bird that doesn't quite have a crest, but it does have a little bit of a bump there. So that's an option there. And there's also a stripe piece that you'll use in so many different places, but the curve of this also matches the curve of the top of the head. You'll also use the stripe piece very frequently on wings to give it those badges that they have on the wings. You might use it, oh, that's a different one there. Sometimes it'll just be a little piece at the neck, but the stripe piece is a really useful piece. You'll use that in lots of different places. So we've also got some face pieces that don't go all the way, it doesn't completely cover the head, it just is the face. So we've got a large face, which leaves a little kind of a widow's peak on the front, but it covers the face and goes down into the chest. We've also got, this is a bib face, and a lot of times it goes all the way up here, but the curve will match, and you can also slide it down to be more of a bib piece. So that's one that works in a couple of different places. We've also got, let's see, we've got a mask. Some birds just have a little mask up over their eyes, a fairly small one, and then sometimes they have what I call a droopy mask. And this is also a mask that almost always goes over the eye, but it droops down and it's much bigger. So that is a possibility. Oh, and I forgot to mention the hood and neck. So this goes all the way back onto the neck on the back and also deep down onto the breast on the front. So that is some of those pieces. And there are matching pieces. There's a crested head and neck and a crested hood. So a lot of those pieces that are shaped to the head are different for the crested head. So now let's look at some chest pieces. So we've got what I call a bandana, because it looks like he's wearing a little bandana. Sometimes I'll tell you to just use the top part of the bandana piece or just the bottom part of the bandana piece, depending on the particular bird. So that is two options that you can use if you're looking at an animal that has a bird that has a patch of color on his throat. There's also this chest and throat piece where the bandana comes straight, tends to slope up or slopes way down. The chest or throat piece slopes down the other direction. So it's giving you a similar patch of color on the throat, but the angle of the back side of the piece is a little bit different. There's also a chin piece that fits right on the chin, but it also can be tucked up quite a bit higher behind the beak. This is one that can slide around different places. And I've also used it in other weird places where it just needed a little triangle of color, maybe coming out from under the wing. I think there was one that had a little triangle like that. So that's just a kind of round-sided triangle that you can use a lot of different ways. So we've got blaze pieces. So very often there will be a blaze over the eye like a chickadee has. Sometimes that blaze is smaller. It could be a medium blaze. And I also have a very small blaze. And those can be in different places. Sometimes those also are up on the top of the head. A lot of these curves will also match the top of the head, so you can move them around as needed. And I also have a little bitty piece called a drop. Sometimes there's a little tuft of feathers right off the top of the beak to give a little patch of color there, like a blue jay has that. There's also like a cedar waxwing has little drops of red waxy substance on their wings. So this little drop piece can appear in a few different, it's another one that you'll see used in a lot of different places. So another possibility, let's look at the wing. So we've got lots of different things for the wing. So even if we have your basic wing, they often have a shoulder that matches their body. Like the wing might be a contrasting color, but the shoulder might match the color of their back. So I've got a basic shoulder piece like that. So just like a little short shoulder. But then some of them have this long shoulder like that. Where it's this long stripe over their shoulder, but there's still mostly wing color showing. And then sometimes there is a large shoulder, which actually the wing is mostly then the color of the large shoulder. And I'll use this sometimes if the tip of the wing is a different color. So the large shoulder may be the color of the back, but it has just a little tip, like a starling sometimes has a black body and black shoulder, but it has little brown tips on his wings. So that is a possibility for that. And the wings often have these stripes on them, just the regular stripe, or we've also got a long stripe piece. So sometimes they're longer and skinnier, more of a stretched out stripe as compared to this one. The long stripe also fits across the bottom of the tail for the occasional bird that has just like a little band of color on their tail. And I've also got an extra long stripe that sometimes will be under the wing, or it can the wing can have a very long stripe, or this can be up at the top of their head, can have this very long swoop up there. Sometimes this regular long stripe will just be an eyebrow on the bird. Some of them have a little fancy little eyebrow. I have a wing swoop. Sometimes the whole front edge, this is not very common, but sometimes the whole front edge of the wing has this stripe on it. So I've got a wing swoop. And there's also, I didn't mention this before, there's a collar piece, and this is designed to fit between the front and the back curve, but I also have used it a number of times. Some birds have like a little spot of contrast underneath their wing, and I'll use the collar piece and just tuck that under there. So you get like that. Some of them have like a little pink blush under the wing or something like that. So that is a useful piece in a couple of different ways. And I'm going to show you in a separate video, I'm going to show you a whole bunch of blocks that do use some of these pieces in unusual ways. The last thing I want to talk about is on the tail. So I did not do a forked tail because usually there are a lot of birds that have a forked tail, but a lot of times that's only visible when they are in flight. And since I did standing pose for all of my birds, I did not do a forked tail. But if you want to show your bird with a forked tail, just cut a little fork in the bottom of it. That is not a big deal. So some birds also have a stripe, or the sides of the tail will be, the tail will be primarily like here blue, but it'll have a red stripe on each side. So when that is the case, I'll use the tail piece and then the tail center stripe on top of that. There are also some birds that just say that they have a very skinny tail, and so I'll use the center stripe as the tail in that situation. So that kind of talks you through the basic, all the basic parts that we might be using. Now I wanted to show you just a couple of things to think about as you're doing these parts. So let's say we're going to do something that's got like a beak to tail, and it has a hood. So when you're looking at your bird, I'm going to give this guy just a regular long beak. I don't know why. When you're looking at your bird pictures, you're looking at a photograph of the bird, and you see, okay, the belly is one color, and the back is a different color, and the head is a third color. So you have a couple of options. You can use the beak to tail piece to get the belly in there, and then you can use the hood piece to get the head color. You also can use instead the back piece. Let's pretend that head and throat is not on there, but you could make your bird body be the belly color and then just add the contrasting on for the back piece, and then lay your hood over that. So that's always a possibility when you're deciding, when the back is one color and the belly is another color, you need to decide whether you want to make your basic bird body the same color as the back or the same color as the belly, and then add a contrasting back or a contrasting belly. And some of what's going to help you in that decision is going to be looking at the lines between those things. So, for example, if I made this, you know what, let me grab a pair of scissors and cut this back apart so that I don't have to say, imagine this head's not there. Okay, so if I'm looking at a bird, let's look at this bird first. So I've made the body, my main body piece, I've just determined that by looking at what the back color is. And I lay the breast on there. Now, look at this scene here, like the neck and the head of the bird are the, where that line is. If I instead put the back on there, we don't have this line. Instead, this, let's put the hood on there. This breast color is going to go all the way up into the bird's head. So you want to look at those little places where all of the pieces come together, and that's going to help you decide whether you're going to do a back or whether you're going to add the contrasting beak to tail. The other thing you want to look at is what goes on top of the others. So let's say you've got a bird that has a cream-colored head and an orange belly and a purple back. So that's great. You've decided that you're going to use these pieces, but now you need to look at, does the head color come down in a straight line to the neck and kind of chop off the beak to tail color? Or does the head color go down first and then you add the beak to tail because this belly color just kind of tapers to a little point at the neck? Both things happen in real birds. So you'll want to look at the line of where things join together, and that's going to help you decide what goes on top of other pieces. Let me grab a sample. So here's an example of that. So here's a violet-backed starling, and on that one, the belly piece, there's a very crisp line of purple between below the beak, where the neck comes. So I made the hood piece go on top of the belly piece. And same thing on, this is a magpie, and this goes all the way down the neck. So I used the head and throat piece, but it goes also over the belly. So the belly didn't taper up nicely. Instead, it looks like his head's been dipped in color. So that goes on the top. But on a painted bunting, the throat color goes all the way up to the beak and comes to a nice little taper there. So on that one, I put the head piece below the breast piece. So again, you're going to want to take all of your pieces that you're going to play around with them and look especially at those joins. Look at those places where the colors all come together, and that's going to help you decide both which pieces you want to use and the order that you want to lay them down in. Okay, so I think that covers all of the basic pieces. I'm going to do a separate video that shows you some unusual ways that I've used the pieces. Some of them are really, really easy. You know that you're going to do you're going to do a wing with a shoulder on it, and that's, there we go, we're done. That's a really easy bird. But some of them get a little more complicated. So I'm going to show you some of the ones where I got more creative with some of the additional pieces. One thing that I forgot to talk about is woodpeckers. So woodpeckers are almost never standing on the ground. So it didn't feel like I could use the just kind of floating in the air. And that's the other thing. When you're laying your bird pieces down, don't try and center them. Anchor them a little bit. They don't have to be sitting right on the bottom edge of your block, but put them in the lower half of your block. That will help to anchor them visually so they won't feel like they're floating in space, even though they are technically floating because we don't put a ground line in there. But when you're doing a woodpecker, I decided to give them tree trunks that they could sit on because that is how we most often see woodpeckers. So there are instructions in the pattern for how to add a tree trunk just using a simple stitch and flip to add that to a regular block. But now I wanted to talk just really, really briefly about positioning the woodpecker on there. So let's just say that this is our tree trunk that we've added to the block. So a woodpecker's body you're going to look, instead of looking at whether their back is parallel to the ground, you want to think about whether their back is parallel to the trunk of the tree. And the tree branch can be under, they'll hang under branches sloping the other direction too. So you've got both of those options to vary things up a little bit. But I'm going to make this guy like he's sitting back. They are almost touching. Their belly is just about touching the trunk of the tree. So you want to lay them in really, really close like that. Their tails, they often have a short-ish tail, and it's often kind of angled down. Some of them even use their tail to help them balance and to help them brace themselves on the tree. So look at the angle that their tail is coming in, but very often that tail is you're gonna wanna actually touch the tree trunk with it or overlap the trunk a little bit. The other thing, so they've got a really long beak, and you can kind of make that coming out that way. The other thing you want to look at is their feet. So because they are really, really close to the tree trunk, their foot is mostly hidden. Oops, I have got, there we go, just did it backwards. So you still want to have their leg, you don't want their leg to look like it's coming out of the middle of their stomach. You want their leg, their foot, their leg to be coming out of their body down where their legs actually come out. You only need to do one because the other one is going to be on the other side of the tree. So the woodpecker is the only one that I did with just a single one. And then I just make, they actually have 4 toes, but 3 toes is annoying enough to outline. So if you really wanted to add a 4th toe, you could, but I just imagine that the 4th toe is on the other side of the tree trunk there. But you're going to want to let a little bit of that leg show like it's coming down from the bottom of the body. So that's one of the trickiest leg placements that you're going to have to do. So I just wanted to show that as a separate little thing here. So that is just a quick little bit on positioning things for the woodpecker.